Hey everybody, this here is Big Will, and I am doing another one of my grading videos, but I have a special thing planned for you today. As you can see, we are live. We have never done that before with one of these. And I also have a guest with me. DS Thomas, what up, man? How you doing?
What's going on, man? Yeah, I'm just it's bad weather here in the East Coast, so I'm just hanging out doing some comic stuff. So I'm glad you asked me to join and talk about some books. So yeah, this should be fun. Look forward to it.
All right. It looks like we got 4 people watching. We got Fire Davis. You're not in my StreamYard yet, else I'd be highlighting you. We got Discovery Bay and Metarog. So, as I explained to you, I have this 282 here, and I have possible issues with it. I noticed when I got it that it was cut a little weird. Now, when I say cut a little weird, I mean, I know some books just have bad raps, and sometimes they get cut off. You might have a leg that's a bit shorter than it should be, and that's just how sometimes they're printed. But this one not only has the cover cut, but it also looks as though something has either been shifted and sliced wrong or something else on the interior. So before we even get to actually grading this book, I need to know if it has been trimmed and if we can say that with any kind of certainty. So let me go to this view, and you are the master compared to me. I'm still a layman with all this grading stuff. How would you approach this book? Because this isn't a classic book. I mean, it's first appearance of Bishop, but it's a lot newer than like a Golden Age book. And I don't know, would that make it harder or easier to tell?
To see if a book is trimmed, and I'm no expert per se, but trimming is the hardest thing to detect usually, and sometimes it's impossible to tell. And even professional graders at CGC can't tell all the time if something's been trimmed. And they're professionals, and they see far more books than all of us
combined.
There's a few tests you can do to get a good idea if a book is trimmed. And there are it's easier to rule out trimming than it is to confirm trimming, if that makes any sense.
That actually makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so you can do some tests, and if it passes some of these tests, then it's not trimmed. But you can't, the opposite's not always true. You can't really confirm that something is trimmed, but sometimes you can confirm that it's not trimmed. And one of the easiest things to do is to look at the book head on like this, like sort of hold it sideways and look down the long edge of the book where the cover is. And those pages across the top like this, it should not be flat across. It should be uneven. And normally if somebody, and there's different ways to trim, but the most amateur type of trimming, yeah, the way you're looking at it there, the most amateur type of trimming is you get a book, you put it down, and you slice the whole edge so that everything on this edge will line up and it'll all be flat and straight and razor good. And books don't look like that because when they're made, they're flat like this. And they're cut like this. So all the pages, when you open it up and it's completely pressed flat when it came off the press, will be completely flat. It's cut. The pages are cut this way and then stapled and folded over. Now, when they're folded over, the cover has to fold around more paper than the interior wraps because it's wrapping around all the other pages, as opposed to the centerfold. It's not wrapping around anything. It's just pressing against itself. So the extra little distance that the cover has to travel to cover all those other pages means it's usually shorter up top. So you usually have something.
So that would it be a good idea then to take one of these suckers to each side of a wrap and see if there's a big difference?
Well, but not necessarily, because the more modern a book is, the more able you are to match it up against another book of the same era from the same publisher. And modern books that come out in the last 10 years, essentially you can look at a Marvel book from 2016 and match it up against another Marvel book from 2016, and they'll be like exact size for the most part. And it's high tech processes at work now. But even going back to the 70s and 80s, it's much better than gold and silver age, but there's still a lot of discrepancy. There's a lot of miscuts and miswraps, and stuff is printed off center. So you could have 5 copies of 282 there, and they're all going to have differences with each other. None of them are going to be exactly the same. So you can't necessarily tell just because some words are cut off or because the image is shifted or it's wrapped a certain way that it's been trimmed. But if you look down the long axis of the open edge of the book like this, if everything is perfectly straight from top to bottom, it's probably been trimmed while it was closed. And like I said, this is more what you're looking for, and it won't look exactly like that, but you can see it's uneven and the cover sort of sticks out on the side. If you get to something that looks more like this, then it's probably been trimmed. And this would be like the cross section looking down the long edge. So this is no good. Something like this is good. And it might be like this on the bottom and less on the top because it doesn't get folded exactly even, and you'll see the staples are rarely lined up on the exact part of the spine. But what you don't want is to see the cross section edge to be completely flat all the way across.
This one looks like a mountain. It has a point near the top of the book, as in the top if you're reading.
Yep.
And then it goes more like this near the bottom of the book. So would that almost guarantee no trimming?
That would look almost, yeah, that would guarantee no trimming. And I'll tell you why it's different from the top to bottom. I'll bet you if you look at the staples, the staple on top is probably centered pretty well on the spine, and the one on the bottom is probably not on the same.
Yeah, I knew that already when I looked at it. I mean, if I just scooch it over here, I can see this staple. This staple is a little bit behind the book.
Right, so it's not perfectly folded. And if that were completely straight on that edge, then it's trimmed, because this book should have, it should be mountainous. And because of the staple placement on that one, it's been folded slightly off center, which is going to even skew that mountain even more. So it would be impossible for that book to have a completely straight edge from cover through the pages to the other cover. Because of the way it's folded and stapled, it would never be perfectly straight. So there should be some sort of up and down, a mountain maybe at one end, and then it'll probably be like slanted at the other end, because it's not stapled and folded exactly perfect. So right off the bat, that tells me that that book has not been trimmed. And I'll show you, I have a good example here if you want to make me big.
First off, I just want to answer Tom's question.
Okay.
There are multiple books you can get, but most people tend to buy the Overstreet Guide to Grading, which I do not have a copy of yet. But even in your traditional Overstreet price guide, it does have the grading guidelines in there.
Yeah, and this is essential. And I'm not a professional grader, but if you have this book, you can learn so much from it. It's cool to just sit down and go through it. It covers all the grades and tells you, it's not going to match up with what CGC says a grade is. Certain things in here, like a detached cover in here, maxes out at 2.5. CGC will max out at 4.0. So it's not going to match up exactly with a CGC grade. So this isn't the best way to see what CGC will give it. But
in my experience, if you go by that, you almost guarantee you'll never be lower than CGC.
Yeah, CGC will probably grade higher because some of the defects don't carry as much weight in today's hobby as they did back in the day, like detached covers, qualified grades. There's a lot of stuff where the grading in the hobby has sort of evolved and been adjusted over time.
Right. So
a lot of purists take issue with that, and that's fine. But I mean, the hobby evolved.
In that case, before we get to grading this 282, show us the example that you said you had for trimming.
Okay, so this is just an old Marvel Age book. I love reading through these things. This isn't like a 1984 book, but yeah. So I'm going to try to show this book, and I first want to show the staples. The top staple you can see from the front, and it's pretty close to the spine, but it's more towards the front. And as we go down the book, you can see this bottom staple is more towards the back. Yeah. So it has been folded slightly off center.
So the title area of the book should be more to the right than the bottom area of the book for the first half of all the wraps then, right?
Yeah, for the most
All before the staples.
Yeah, but you know the way they print these things too, they're also not printed perfectly straight. So the interior margins might not have the same slant as the cover wrap because they're printed differently. But in any event, if you look down the long edge of this, and I don't know if this is going to show up. This is the first time I've tried to do this. But you can see the pages are not even. Is that showing up? I don't know how well this is going to show up. This is a tough thing to do on YouTube, but you can see the pages.
Yeah, we can see it's a mountain there.
Yeah, now the mountain is different from this side than it is from this side, but it's still a mountain. There it shows out good. You can see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I'll try to hold it closed, but you can see the pages in the middle sticking out further than the cover wrap, and you can see that ridge running down, and it sort of decreases as you get to the other end of the book. But this has not been trimmed. You can see it was cut at the facility where they produced it. All the pages were cut together, and then it was folded, and when it got folded, it lines up differently. So it doesn't have to look exactly like this, but when you have this mountain range in there at the edge of the book, it's not been trimmed.
Wow, thank you.
Now, sometimes it's not as easy to tell because when you get into some Silver Age books, there's some really funky wraps and funky cuts, and things aren't always lined up. And the biggest myth about determining trimming, and again, I'm no expert, but everybody says get another identical issue to compare to that.
I have proof that will not work.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
You can show, this is the one we'll be grading. Now we showed you here are the staples and where it lines up. You see the staples underneath there. And as we move here, it's above just like his. And then you can see where it lines up on the X-Men cut, the name and the leg. Here's another copy of X-Men 282. It's even different. And the staples are even different. One staple above, one staple about the same position. Here's another copy of 282. It's also different with how far it cuts into the name. Look how bad it cuts right there into the signature of the artist. And it is severe. It has a severe roll compared to the others. Both the staples are sitting on top, but as you can see, these go into the black line, but these do not. So it would be shifted on this one as well.
Yeah, and all three of those likely, you'll find three more that will also be different than those three. And this is why people treasure nicely centered books, especially Marvel Bronze Age. Those are the worst because I'm trying to think of a good example of a book where sometimes even like in Avengers 196, you have the UPC or the direct code on the bottom, and then you have the title on top. Those will shift up and down where sometimes the UPC is right at the bottom edge, and sometimes there's like a half inch between the UPC and the bottom edge, and the image is shifted so far up, and that can happen right to left or up and down, and that's just production quality, and that's why nicely centered books bring us a little bit of an extra premium because there are so many variations in the production quality of these books. And when you get back into Silver Age and especially Golden Age, if you have a Silver Age ASM that you think is trimmed and you compare it to another Silver Age ASM, same issue even, they might not be the same size. They might not. They'll have some differences. Sometimes there will be a little overlap at the end of the cover, and sometimes the cover will not overlap. And it's just, you can't tell by comparing it to another same book all the time. But the peak, the mountain range thing that we talked about is probably the best way to tell if a book has been trimmed.
All right, then. So I guess it's safe to say this one is most likely not trimmed. So let's actually get into the grading of this thing. I know you grade, you press, you clean. Do you use a black light?
I have one and I use it, but the thing about this, and that's another myth about these black lights, First of all, we're trying to use ultraviolet light to see if anything on the book will fluoresce or absorb it and be black. So if you have, things will react to visible light differently than UV light. Now, the first thing about UV light is you can't see UV light with your eyes. So when you turn on a black light or you turn on this flashlight and you see that purple glow, you're not seeing the actual UV light. You're seeing what's called near ultraviolet. It's close and it's starting to get towards ultraviolet, but once you get into the ultraviolet, you actually can't see it with your eyes. But in any event, the only things that are going to really fluoresce or show good under a black light particularly well are things that are organic, like glues that were made with animal products, certain types of color touch, but not everything that's restorative is even going to show up under that flashlight either. Now, some of it will, but there could be
my favorite thing
that won't show up.
Yeah, my favorite thing that I use it for is it helps me see spine ticks a little better than if I was just looking at it with my eye. But I've noticed it shows me other things too, that if I was grading it without the black light, it wouldn't even affect the grade because it's just because it's ultraviolet light and it makes things glow that don't normally glow.
Yeah, the thing I hardly ever use this when I'm grading a book or when I'm cleaning a book and I need to see what needs to be cleaned, or when I'm trying to guess the grade of a book and go over it. I hardly ever use this. The only time I use this is if I think there's something funky on part of a book, like you can feel the book, the smooth gloss of the cover, even over the spine and everything. And if you feel a little rough patch or like a little gritty patch and you can't see anything, or something feels a little funky and it doesn't seem like there's dirt, that might be glue. Color touch, you can usually determine without using this, and it doesn't always show the color touch anyway. But if there's something funky like that, I might change the light source and turn out the lights in the room and use this and see if any parts of the cover are responding to this light differently than the rest of the cover. It's not necessarily going to glow like a blacklight poster, but it might show certain areas might respond to this light differently than the majority of the cover. You might see a little darker spot, or a different way it's reflecting or absorbing this light. And I only use this if I think there's something funky, like there might be some glue, something like that. Color touch, usually you can tell without using this. So I don't use this very often, but glue is a good way to use it, but it doesn't show all the glues. It only shows like animal product glue, because those will fluoresce because they have biological fluids in them.
All right, so how do you count your pages?
Well, the first thing about counting pages is determine how many pages are in the book. And a good way to do that is to go on My Comic Shop or Comic Books Plus, and you can see how many pages are in a book. Now, if you go on My Comic Shop and you look up the number of pages for a book and it says 36 pages, okay, now you have a good starting point, 36 pages. But how do you count the pages? Every side of every piece of paper is considered a page. So this would be page 1. The front cover would be page 1, and then the interior cover would be page 2. So you just count every side of paper, front, back, front, back, front, back, of cover, all the pages, and back cover. And that will equal 36. That's a quick way to do it. It's basically 18 pages of paper or 9 wraps. So you can, if you have the number of pages, you can divide by 4, and that's the total number of wraps.
How I do it is I go 8 and 8. After I do the cover, I count 8 pages before the staple, make sure there's another 8 after the staple, and then, of course, the back cover. And then, of course, 8 and 8, 16, 16 and 16 is 32. And that's the actual pages that are in the book. And then, like you said, if you count the cover and all, you have a standard 36 pages.
Yeah, that'll work. But if you count your 32 pages and then you go look and it says somewhere it's supposed to be 36 pages, and you're like, oh, I'm short, I'm missing 4 pages. You're not, because the cover in like My Comic Shop or Comic Books Plus, the technical counting of the pages includes the covers. So yes, 32, and then you just have to know that the cover counts as 4 pages to bring you up to 36.
Yeah, I ran into that grading for the first time, a Wonder Woman 200. It's a 52 big page book. It actually doesn't have 52 pages unless you count the covers. It has 48.
Right. Yeah, and when you get into certain eras, you know that a lot of books in a certain era are going to be 36 pages.
Right.
And you know, going back, you'll get Golden Age. There's certain publishers during certain eras where it's 48 pages or 52 pages or 64 pages. There's a lot of 64 page stuff in Golden Age DC.
But
And I don't memorize them. I just look them up on my comic shop,
Yeah.
and then you can count them.
But as far as most books in the silver, bronze, and copper age, you're going to be 32 interior pages counting the covers. 36 is your standard.
Right.
So if you can go 8 and 8, you're probably good. But if there's any doubt, definitely need to look it up. And if it says anything about 52 big pages or double-sized anniversary, anything like that, you definitely need to make sure. So this book happens to be complete. It has all its pages, and there's nothing I see on the interior that would worth noting other than figuring out what color is that. Looking at it in person, I would say if it's not white, it's off-white to white.
Well, yeah, the thing about page coloring, if I can speak a second about that.
Go ahead. I want an owl card. I don't have one yet.
All right, well, let me maybe save you a couple bucks. This used to come with an owl card. Whenever you bought a copy of this, there would be an owl card in it. They stopped doing that recently, so now when you buy it, it doesn't come with the owl card anymore. And the reason is the owl card has sort of fallen out of favor and is falling more out of favor more and more each day as the way to measure page quality. And the reason is that different publishers use different paper stock at different times, such that paper color varies widely across the history of comics at this point. And essentially what most people do, and especially CGC, and this is the best way to think about it, sort of the prevailing idea of page color is whatever the brightest, best page color for that publisher at that time was, it will be considered white. And none of them are ever going to look like this. Now, the owl card has a white, and some books are brighter than that white on the owl card, and some books are darker than that white on the owl card. But different publishers at different times use different paper stock. And you know, a Charlton book from the 60s is not going to have as good a paper quality and as bright as, you know, a Marvel from the 80s. Now, when they came off the press, right off the press, brand new, never even been opened or read, they're still going to have different colors. Under the owl card, you might get an off-white for one and a white for the other. But the prevailing idea is that both of those should be considered white because that's the freshest that those pages can be.
So would you say that this is white then? Because this was in like, what, 89, 90, 91, somewhere in there?
Yeah, it's hard to tell on video, but that looks like white pages to me. I mean,
I can tell you right now, it looks the same in person as it does on the video right now.
Yeah, I think those are white pages.
Okay, well, we're complete. We know our page color. So what about the grade? Well, as far as it's got plenty of gloss on it. To me, it looks very shiny. I have, let me count here up close. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 color breaking ticks. And of those, one looks like 2 cause a dent in the cover. And then we, of course, have this corner that's been blunted, and it accounts for a couple of the spine ticks. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see that shows up pretty good.
Yeah.
So you got a corner crush, and then you've got what, 2 or 3 spine ticks?
More like 7 or 8.
7 or 8 spine ticks and a corner crush.
On the back, we look at the back cover. It looks pretty good as far as this side where my thumb is, but I come up here, looks like it's got a little bit of tearing or something there. It is not rounded. Some of it's missing. And up here at the top, that's actually a bit that's loose. and it's a little small, minute chunk that's been pulled off. And of course, that corner's color breaking ding there, small dog ear. And as far as the opposite of, oh, here you can see it real good on the inside. See
Yeah.
that? And as far as this side of the front cover, it looks, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. So what do you think it is?
Well, at this point, I would normally break out my Overstreet and guesstimate based on what it tells me guidelines are. And I already knew, to me, with this many spine ticks and a crunch and a very minuscule pieces missing, I would put this no higher than, it couldn't be higher than a 7.5 to me. I think it's probably more like a 7.
Yeah,
using that grade
probably,
scale.
you know, well, and the way I do it, I don't break out the Overstreet guide very often.
Well, I'm still new, so that's the only reason why I do it.
Well, I mean, I'm still new too, but let me explain why I don't break it out all the time. Usually you get a feel for an accumulation of defects. It's sort of an even amount of defects. You usually don't have a perfect book with one massive defect. Like if you have a perfect mint book with a 2-inch tear, okay, then I'll break out the Overstreet and see what's a 2-inch tear going to affect the grading. How will that exactly work? But when you just have a book that's just evenly eroded all the way down, you know, as it goes, you go from 9.8 and it's just even
Right.
minor defects, more and more and more and more.
And I also want to say that I tend to grade very harsh, as if I'm going to sell it. I'm not, but if I were, I would be grading very harsh. So I would say probably a 7, but couldn't go higher than a 7.5. Would you agree based on what you've seen?
I mean, I think it's 7.5. Now, without a press, there's going to be wrinkles and dents in the cover. It's not going to be perfectly flat. You know, I think you're talking probably 7.5 on that book. It doesn't have anything massive, but it's got an accumulation of minor defects. I think 7.5. You might hit an 8 on it. If you press that, even with the defects there, it'll be nice and flattened out.
I won't.
Then
I
you
plan on using this one. I have a new Teen Titans #2, and I have another book that I want to grade and send in without pressing and see if I'm good enough to at least not have CGC be lower than what I say. If I'm on it or they're higher, great. But
yeah, I think it's 7.5 probably, that book. And you know, I'm no expert in determining what the grade is. When it's a low grade book,
I know
so many Golden Age, I'm pretty spot on. But when it starts getting into like the 8, 8.5, 9.0, 9.2 range, man, I cannot figure that out for the life of me sometimes. But I feel like this is under that range. I feel like this is just under the 8 to 9.2 range.
a 9.2 and up to a 9.8, they're all near mint. It's just varying degrees, so it's very hard to tell.
Yeah, and there's some defects that are hard to even identify properly, especially on some gray tone covers. You know, they've been hitting me a lot. I spoke about this the other day about cover tanning. That's hard for me to gauge how that's going to affect it. You know, things like that. But, you know, there's also tearing at the staples. That a lot of people don't look at where the staples are. You'll see some tearing and some sort of roughage where the staples penetrate.
I did check while you were talking. This one's good to go on those staple tears.
Okay, yeah, a lot of times people don't notice the tearing of the staples or if they're slightly pulled, and a book looks much higher than it actually is because of the staple problems. But yeah, I mean, I think you're looking at probably 7.5 on that. I think that's a 7.5 without a press, 7.5.
All right, then.
But I'm not expert in assigning the grade, but I think it wouldn't surprise me if it came back a little bit lower, or it probably wouldn't come back lower. It might hit an 8. I don't think you're going to get higher than an 8 on that book, but it's possible. I'm not, I don't know. I put it at like 7.5.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to stick with my initial 7.
That is bringing the grade down a lot because it has a lot of associated wrinkles and folds and bends, and you could press that out and improve the grade of that book for sure.
Well, all right then. Well, thank you for helping me grade my book.
Yeah, man, it's fun. I have fun doing it. I'm not an expert. I feel very comfortable with low grade books, but when it gets to higher grade stuff, The higher the grade, the tougher it is for me to grade it, honestly. Yeah, and there's another thing. Sometimes cleaning a book doesn't bring the grade up much, or pressing the book might not bring the grade up much. But I'll tell you, the graders are people, and there's a subconscious thing to what they don't see. If they have a pleasant sort of subconscious pleasant experience with a book where it's flat, it's clean, it's glossy, it's nice, I feel like subconsciously that helps get on one side or the other of the fence. I feel like it gets you on the high side of the fence, as opposed to a book that may have some dirt that's not going to affect the grade, or some dents that won't affect the grade, or something that may not affect the grade, but you left it there, or it's present on the book, and you might subconsciously, they might err on the other side of the fence. So I always think it's a good idea to clean and press your books thoroughly. Even if you don't think it might help the grade, it's gotta be subconsciously have some sort of effect.
Yeah.
I think over time you get a couple extra half grades here and there from having somebody look at a nice clean book as opposed to a dirty book of the same grade.
Right. Well, like I said, thanks again for coming, man. Thank you to everyone in the chat for watching, and everyone who will watch on replay. And we're not going to do it now, but later, at some point today or tomorrow, I'll be recording another grading video. And just to give you a preview, that's what I'm grading. Punisher 1, the limited series. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate you, and we'll see you later.